Thanks. Got a pointer here. All right. Sorry, point that way. Okay. All right, my name's Zane Kessler. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the River District. I have the pleasure of working with towns and counties and state legislators throughout the Western Slope and an amazing team at the River District to advance our mission, which I'm going to get into a little bit with you, tell you a little bit about who we are, why we were founded, what we do on your behalf as a governmental entity on the Western Slope, and then talk a little bit about the challenges facing the Colorado River and some of the reasons we are in the situation we're in. So, the River District was founded in 1937 by the Colorado General Assembly to serve as the principal water policy and planning agency on Colorado's Western Slope, 15 counties, which we'll get into in a minute. You can't see this very well, but we represent all water users. We represent ag, recreation, environmental uses, municipal and industrial. We exist to represent and protect the water interests of the Western Slope. We have a dual mission at the River District, an intrastate mission and an interstate mission. Sorry, this pointer is driving me crazy. I'm going to back up. We were created by the legislature in 1937 at the request of West Slope citizens who woke up one morning to find out on the headlines of the Denver newspaper that they were going to ship yet even more water out of the headwaters to the growing Front Range east of the Continental Divide. We were formed in direct response to the Colorado Big Thompson project, which was in 1937 and still is today the largest trans-mountain diversion, carrying somewhere near 250,000 acre-feet a year from the Colorado River's headwaters in Grand County under the Continental Divide to the growing Larimer and Boulder County and Denver municipal areas. Sorry. So back to our mission. As I said, we represent and protect the Western Slope's interests. We are here for you. We serve in legal, technical, policy aspects to ensure that the water interests of our constituents within the 15 counties we represent are protected. We also, importantly, have an interstate charge in our mission and in our authorizing statutes. And that is to represent and protect the state's entitlement of water under the Colorado River Compact of 1922. So, looking at the Colorado River Basin as a whole, a few things I want you to observe here. This is the Colorado River District's boundary in blue. These are the 15 counties west of the Continental Divide. From the Continental Divide to Utah border, from the Wyoming border to the north slope of the San Juans. We're about a third of the total land mass of the state. We're about 80% of the state's total water, but significantly less, only about 10 or 15% of the state's population. Our sister agency is the Southwestern Water Conservation District, is outlined just to the south of us. Collectively, these two districts generate somewhere near 75% of the Colorado River's natural flow at Lee Ferry. And Lee Ferry is an important point on the map because that's the dividing line between Upper Basin and Lower Basin. The Upper Basin states, of course, are Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico. Lower Basin states are Arizona, Nevada, and California. Another thing to observe on this map here is these areas shaded in dark gray. These are the water consumption areas or the areas outside of the Colorado River's natural basin that rely on exports of water. So of course you have Colorado's Front Range and the Arkansas River Valley that rely on trans-mountain diversions to support economic growth and agricultural operations here in Colorado. The Wasatch Front you have near Salt Lake City, outside of the basin also San Juan, Chama area, so everything essentially Albuquerque down south, irrigating agricultural areas in New Mexico, and then of course the major consumers in the San Diego and Los Angeles Metroplex and the Imperial and Coachella valleys. Notice how much here, think of the population here that relies on out-of-basin demands. Southern California alone is a major consumer of Colorado River outside of its natural boundaries. So 1922 compact. I'm going to read you a brief quote from a book by a gentleman named Norris Hundley, Jr., who wrote the book Water in the West, Lake Powell Water in the West. Well, I thought I had it. Apologies. No, there we go. The date was November 24, 1922. The speaker was Herbert Hoover, Secretary of Commerce and future President of the United States. He said, "This conference has stood out in my mind as different. It is the only conference of important character where I haven't come to have a complete conviction of dishonesty on the part of somebody. What is more," added Hoover, "this conference has dealt with one of the problems of more extreme complexity than will ever be appreciated by the outside world." And here we are 100 years later. And that quote is largely true. The 1922 Compact has worked for the last 100 years. It wasn't until the turn of the century, so about 80 years into the Compact, where we started to see problems, and those challenges and those problems we'll dive into quickly. But another observation about the 1922 Compact is it was formed at the request of Upper Basin representatives, and specifically Colorado's representative, that noticed the rapid development and rapid additional consumption of water by the lower basin, that at the time the Colorado River was governed as a whole on the system of prior appropriation. Who knows what the system of prior appropriation is? Raise a hand if you know. Okay, so we've got a number of water wonks here. Essentially, first in time, first in right. He or she who has the most senior right gets the right to develop and use that right first. If you're behind that right in line, then you're out of luck. And Colorado recognized that. We had a massive amount of water flowing downstream to California, where they were going to, at the time, under the system of prior appropriation, lay claim to the majority of our water resources. So they brought this compact committee together to essentially discuss the issue of equitability, or equitable distribution of the river's resources. And that's really what they did. The Colorado River Compact of 1922 essentially split the river in half. 7.5 million acre feet to the upper basin, 7.5 million acre feet to the lower basin. And it was not necessarily so much about the numbers as it was the equitable apportionment. And I want you to keep that in mind for future slides. I guess, yeah, here, so we know 7.5 and 7.5. And there are additional treaties and other appropriations that have given out essentially a total of 17.5 million acre feet out of the river. 7.5 to the lower basin, 7.5 to the upper basin. Lower basin gets an additional 2.5 out of their tributaries. The country of Mexico gets some. We're not going to go into all of that tonight, but we'd be happy to talk with you about it offline. Here's what we have in actual consumption on the river. So you can see a significant imbalance. 11.5 million acre feet being used on average by the lower basin every year. In the upper basin, we haven't even come close to hitting our 7.5 million acre feet. We're somewhere in the range of 4 to 4.5 million acre feet. So why is that? Well, one thing is an agreement known as the 2007 Interim Guidelines. And this is, although it's a cartoon, it's a little complicated, so I'll try to walk us through it. First, let's look at our storage. We've got Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Lake Mead is the lower basin's checking account. That was built to ensure that they had the water they needed in dry times, and they would be able to continue to develop and grow their economies and their agricultural operations in the lower basin. That was developed first. Then came Lake Powell and the CRISP units, Colorado River Storage Project. Lake Powell was intended to be our savings account. The upper units of the CRISP system are Flaming Gorge in Wyoming, Blue Mesa here on the western slope in Gunnison County, and Navajo Reservoir in New Mexico. Those were designed as reservoirs. They were designed to ensure that the federal system would operate in times of shortage. So they have worked quite well, again, since they were built and up until recently. And they work so long as the lower basin is held to their limits under the compact. But the 07 guidelines essentially enabled the lower basin to continue using. The lower basin has the luxury of living below storage. We do not. We live above the major storage projects. We live within the hydrology. Anybody here that's an irrigator will be able to tell you, when the water's out, it's out. When the ditch runs dry, we're done with water. When the snowpack is gone, we live within our means and we do what we can with what we've got. That's not the case in the lower basin. They live beneath the major storage projects and have the luxury of continuing to draw off the system. And that, in connection to the interim guidelines, these interim guidelines essentially enabled the overuse of the lower basin by allowing them to draw down mead to certain levels so that Powell would continue to release in order to maintain some certain levels at mead in Powell. Those guidelines are up for renegotiation in the coming years, and the River District is at the table with the state and others, ensuring that we don't get bamboozled. So that's one of the ways that we're working to represent and protect the water interests of the Western Slope, is ensuring that the state is adequately prepared and has the resources they need to enter those negotiations and ensure that we get a fair shake when they're renegotiated. They expire in 2026, and negotiations are occurring currently. So another reason that we're in the problem, or the situation we're in on the Big River, and let me do a time check. Are we doing good? Okay. Multi-decadal drought. Early aughts, we started seeing drought unlike what we've seen in the history of the compact and in modern history, period. We've seen warmer temperatures, we've seen soil moisture deficits, we've seen all these things that we hear and read about here in Western Colorado, but the science is pretty clear. With hotter temperatures, and over the last 120 years, we have seen significant increases in temperatures here on the Western Slope. If you look at a graph that many of you may have seen at previous states of the river, you'll note that in Western Colorado, we lie under one of the largest hotspots in the continental US of temperature rise between the late 1800s and now. In the western end of our district, Montrose, Mesa, Moffett counties, we've seen 4-degree increase in temperature rise over the last century, 120 years. Here in the headwaters, we're seeing significant temperature rise as well. We've seen upwards of 3 degrees temperature rise in Eagle County, 2.5 or 2.9 here in Summit County. And when you do the math based on science that's coming out of Colorado State, coming out of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, coming from reputable science here in Colorado, we know that for every 1 degree, we see around 3 to 9% decrease in stream flow. Take that number just in the middle, and I will say that trends more often towards the higher end of that percentage, but cut it in half, say 5%. We've got 3-degree increase in Summit, Eagle County area. That's 15% less water in the river. At the same time, where's my population growth? At the same time, we've got a drink that's getting smaller due to prolonged drought, and at the same time, we're sticking more straws in that drink. In Colorado alone, our population today is somewhere around 5.5 million people. We're expected to nearly double that to 9 million by the year 2050. The lower basin currently, and I didn't say this earlier, I should have, when I showed you the map of the basin, that 75% of the river's natural flow comes off of the western slope of Colorado, primarily the snowpack. That supports 40 million people downstream currently. That number is expected to increase to 76 million by the year 2060. So we've got major challenges here presently today and major challenges coming at us, coming down the pike. I'm going to back up. Soil moisture. These are 2 years of soil moisture maps that are taken in November because those are the last soil moisture calculations of the year before the snow comes. And what we know, and what you've heard a little bit in the last presentation is that soil moisture impacts the way that we manage our water resources. It impacts the way that water returns to the river. So this is the beginning of the snowpack year last year, so November 2020. It looked like just a giant bruise across the entire American Southwest. The image on the right is November 15th, 2021. Slightly better, but still significantly below average soil moisture. This impacts runoff. Last year, we had roughly 90% of average snowpack. We had 30% of average runoff. When the soils are as dry as they are, the snow melts and the water goes straight into the ground. It does not return to the river in the natural system that we've built up cities and economies around. We've counted on water returning to the rivers and being able to distribute that water here and downstream as well. So soil moisture is another major challenge that we're facing on the western slope. This map is a little bit off. There's something wrong with the formatting, I'm sorry. But this black line here is total amount of water allocated on the river. So 17.5 million acre feet allocated on paper according to the compact and the law of the river, the numerous treaties and other things that I discussed earlier. The blue line is the 10-year running average. So you can see that only once ever has the 10-year running average met the total amount of water in the river. Now let's look at the total average from 1906 to current. Total average is actually closer to 14 million acre feet. So we've got 17.5 allocated on paper. We've got 14 million is the running average over the last 110, 115 years. And here's the most sobering one for me. Here's the average from 2012 to 2021. We are barely at 12.5 million acre feet. So the hydrology, you can see over time, this is a very variable river. We've got good years, bad years, but it is trending in the wrong direction, and it's a reason for us all to be concerned, and it's one of the reasons that the River District exists to, again, represent and protect the interests of Western Colorado. Current conditions in the reservoirs, again, I think this probably speaks for itself, but Lake Mead is at 30% full. Lake Powell is at 23% full, historic low at Powell, and in danger of losing a very important source. Oh, actually, before I almost got ahead of myself. I'll just say, it's not just us talking about this anymore. It's not just the annual States of the River on the western slope, thinking about what's happening on the big river, how does that impact us here at home. Our phones are ringing off the hook with press and folks that are interested in how this is going to impact, again, 40 million people throughout the American Southwest. The conditions at Powell are approaching a pretty significant crisis condition. 3490 is the level, and that's feet above sea level on the dam. That's how they measure storage on the dam. But 3490 is minimum power pool. Today we are at 3523. Is that somewhere around there? 3523. So we are approaching minimum power pool. That means below 3490, Glen Canyon Dam will cease to be able to produce hydropower. And that's important for us on the western slope for a number of reasons. First, it's very questionable whether or not we will be able to deliver the compact obligations to a lower basin without those hydropower turbines running. The bypass tubes were not built to deliver 7.5 million acre feet, and there are a lot of engineering questions about whether or not that dam can handle that without sending the water through the hydropower turbines. Second is Western Colorado rural cooperatives purchase power from the Western Area Power Administration that is provided by Glen Canyon Dam. So we that live in Western Colorado that are members of rural electric cooperatives that buy their power from Tri-State, that buys their power from WAPA, we have the potential to see some pretty significant problems on the electricity grid as a result of Powell not being, or Glen Canyon Dam not being able to produce power. And then lastly, the revenues of that power are really important to many of the programs that protect West Slope water users, like the Upper Colorado Recovery Endangered Fish Program, Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program, relies on power revenues from power sold at Glen Canyon Dam. A number of important conservation programs that fund fish and wildlife programs and others come from power revenues off of Glen Canyon Dam. So that's a major issue that we are watching actively. We are working with the feds and the state to try and figure out how are we going to navigate this crisis situation, and how are we going to ensure that Western Colorado is protected in the face of crisis. Last slide, I've thrown out a lot of doom and gloom to you today. I'm going to save the rosy picture for the last presentation of the night. Melissa is going to talk about Colorado River District's community funding project, and what are we doing to invest in communities here on the Western Slope to ensure that our municipalities, our agricultural producers, and all of our water users are prepared for a hotter, drier future. But just in recap, what are we doing on interstate issues? We're at the table on interim guideline renegotiations. We're in DC ensuring that our congressional members and our agencies are aware of the needs of Western Colorado. Across the divide, across the continental divide, we're at the state legislature. We maintain a regular presence there, again, to ensure that our West Slope legislators are well informed and have the information they need to help protect our interests as well. Front Range conservation outreach, working with Front Range water users to ensure that they know where their water comes from. Sadly, a lot of folks on the Front Range, and also throughout the state, throughout the West, all they know about water is if they turn their tap on and it runs, it's fine. They don't necessarily understand the impacts of their use on recreation, agriculture, municipal availability of water supplies here in the headwaters. So we're working to educate Front Range water users on that front. And then lastly, on the Western Slope, working, as Melissa's going to talk about later, to fund water projects here in productive agriculture, recreation, environment, habitat, making sure again that we're prepared for that hotter, drier future that is undoubtedly going to come with less water. I saw a friend and a colleague of ours that I want to recognize who walked in while I was speaking. Representative Dylan Roberts is here. When I said we work with state legislators at the state capitol, Dylan has been a huge supporter of West Slope water needs on the Western Slope. He's been a friend and a trusted ally of ours at the Capitol, making sure that we have a voice in Denver. So, thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lindsay.
Thanks, Zane. Don't go too far. We have just enough time for a few questions.
Yeah, I'll let you keep the mic for that one.
Sure. And you said Lake Dillon. Were you? Yeah. Okay. The question is, what can we realistically do? I would say that's a question that's been raised for the last 80 plus years. There's always been an imbalance of power, economic power, political power. The Western Slope has always been the David in the David versus Goliath. We really are the stretch in the rubber band. We have demands to the east, we have demands to the west. But I would say, on the Western Slope, we've done a damn good job of staying united and working together. When I talked about Dylan Roberts and the work that he and others do on the Western Slope, our Western Slope delegation sticks together in Denver. A Republican, Democrat, purple, blue striped, everything in between, to ensure that we are standing up to that imbalance. That imbalance of power exists intrastate. West Slope has far fewer people, far less economic and political might than the Front Range. Same is true of Colorado in the big picture, lower basin. I mean, state of California has far more congressional members than the entire upper basin combined. So it's always been an imbalance of power, and I think with that consideration in mind, we've done, again, a good job of ensuring that our needs are met. At the district, we have a team of attorneys that is making sure that we're litigating and in the courtroom arguing on behalf of our water users. And so, yes, push comes to shove, and push will come to shove in the future. But I think so long as we are a unified West Slope that stands together, we're certainly stronger together than we would be if we were apart. So yes, you're right. Those reservoirs in the question was, last year we released a lot of water out of Blue Mesa to help protect levels at Lake Powell and protect that hydropower production. This year they're releasing significant releases from Flaming Gorge in Wyoming, again to help protect hydropower and maintain those levels at Powell. That's a one-time shot in the arm. And we recognize that, and the Bureau recognizes that as well. We don't get multiple shots at that bird. It is an emergency situation, and those are emergency actions that are being taken to, again, protect hydropower levels at Powell. Recognizing that that's a temporary Band-Aid, what we have to do and what the River District is actively advocating for is permanent reductions of use in the lower basin. The only way we address the major issues on the river and the storage levels at Powell and Meade are if the lower basin takes permanent cuts in, or permanent reductions in use. So those emergency operations, they're called the DROA releases. We recognize that's a one-time shot in the arm. We don't get another shot at that anytime soon. But you know, we're advocating for permanent reductions of use in the lower basin.